14 years. That's the average that it takes a military veteran from leaving service to asking for help, living with PTSD. That's 14 years of relationships breaking down, of sleep getting worse, of careers maybe even ending. That is what happens when we wait almost a decade and a half to ask for help. I'm a trauma psychologist and I work with military and frontline personnel. And in this video, I'm going to break down what happens in those 14 years and the warning signs to look out for yourself or somebody that you love before it reaches crisis point. Now, the reason that people sometimes don't ask for help is not necessarily denial. It's actually more to do with identity. Within military and frontline services, the identity and the culture is everything, really. It's your whole sense of who you are and being able to handle things. So asking for help feels like you're saying, I can't handle it. I can't do the job, or I can't handle leaving service. And so the culture reinforces that maladaptive coping strategy. And so the culture reinforces that everybody around you is saying they're fine and you should too, perhaps. But actually, what really happens in those 14 years is that you're not really coping. You're just telling yourself and everybody around you that you're coping and you can handle it and nothing's going on. And that is actually leading to a worse outcome, really, in the end. And in that time, what happens is it's not anything that we notice immediately sometimes. It builds gradually. So it could be that your sleep starts to go a bit off track, or you start feeling a bit on edge all the time. That's hypervigilance, essentially. And then maybe you start walking in and scanning rooms, looking for the exits. Maybe that's something that you've normalized with the work that you've done before. But when you're starting to notice it coming in situations that you're meant to be relaxing, it's starting to become a problem. Maybe you're starting noticing that you're withdrawing more, that you're disconnecting from your relationships because it just feels safer to disconnect. So we start to numb a lot of the time as a result of that. We can maybe turn to alcohol, or we can turn to overworking, exercise, all of these things to just kind of turn down the volume on the nervous system. And so, last thing is that when we get to that point of all of these symptoms now going on at the same time, that is when all of it is becoming a real issue. Because by the time that we ask for help, at that point, they're not at the beginning of the issue. They're now on the major end of a decline. So the person sitting in front of me hasn't just had a bad month or a bad few months. They've had quite a number of years where these things have built up. These responses now are quite embedded. And that is when they're confused and saying, well, why can't I handle this? What's wrong with me? So by the time that they're asking that question, what's wrong with me? Then we know that there's been a gradual decline over many years. And that is when really we need to think about how we can intervene a lot earlier. Because by the time that it comes to that, then the brain is just less flexible. The nervous system has developed patterns of reacting, and the brain has developed neurological pathways that keep firing every time a similar situation is deemed as dangerous or unsafe. So getting help sooner is much easier because the patterns that we are rewiring haven't spent a decade and a half building into really embedded responses. So this is the whole point that I talk about in terms of early intervention. We need to get there as soon as possible. But I also know that it's very difficult because in the cultural background of these services, we're taught to just get on with it, to just be okay and just handle it. So I get that it can be really difficult to actually admit that there's an issue to begin with. If you're wondering whether some of these aspects, some of these symptoms are coming up in your life and whether you should be worried about them, I've created a free resource called the Frontline Stress Check, which the link's in the description. You can download it. And like I said, it's completely free. It's a quiz that takes about 3 minutes. And it will help to identify all of these areas that I've just talked about and how high you score in these areas. and it will give you an overall risk score for all of it. What I'm hoping is that people will start to identify this a lot sooner, and I'm trying to put out as much content as I can do to be able to help people to identify it so that they're not waiting 14 years to be able to know that actually something is building. And if you want more content like this, made specifically for people who do the jobs that most people can't, then hit subscribe. I'm going to be sharing a lot more content to help you guys out there based on my experience, my clinical work, and what I feel is helpful for anybody out there who's struggling.